My name is UkkiKai, and I got this idea of writing to myself letters, and not to who am I right now, but who I was like 10 years ago. And this is my third letter number 3. Dear Kai, I hope your morning has started with as much energy as mine. It is still dark outside, but the urge to get up was stronger than the wish to stay in bed. I wanted to sit down and write to you, because it feels like I have a lot to say. Over the years, I've read many books about human behavior and the brains. I knew that it is possible to change how we act and how we live, but the change usually follows certain rules. One book in particular has had a strong influence on my life, especially on this later half of it. It is Julian Cameron's The Artist's Way. The book was first published in 1992 and has since been updated many times. It includes a 12-week program focusing on developing inner creative side of a person. I'm not usually a big fan of so-called exercise books, but this one has genuinely changed many things in my life. I won't go deeper into it here. You can explore it yourself if you are curious, but I do recommend it. Inspired by the book a few years ago, I started writing so-called morning pages. And I still write them regularly. At first, writing was not easy for me. There were mornings when I really didn't feel like doing it, but once I started writing, the words somehow began to come. Every morning, after waking up, I write a couple of pages, whatever happens to be on my mind. Sometimes it makes sense, often it doesn't. And that's perfectly fine. It doesn't need to be logical or smart. The only important thing is to write. Over time, everyone finds their own rhythm with it, and there is a very specific feeling once you have finished writing, a small sense of accomplishment. I can tell you more about my own way of doing it later. In any case, that daily writing slowly made me more awake, day by day. I began writing a simple plan for myself, just asking, what will I do today? There was no sudden movement of clarity, no apple falling on my head, so to speak. Nothing opened up all at once. But little by little, I started to understand what was good for me and what wasn't. I began questioning my own habits. I didn't notice any big changes at first. Instead, I started paying attention to very small things. I once heard a hockey coach say that the first thing he asks his players to do in the morning is to make their own bed. Yes, it sounds almost ridiculous, but there is a reason for that. It means the day begins with one completed action, a small positive start. That's where I began. I started making my bed as soon as I got up. Gradually, I added small things to that routine. Some of them later became surprisingly big. One of those things was my morning walk. Another was questioning my use of alcohol. I started asking myself whether it is sensible to drink throughout the day, only to end the evening with such a bad heartburn that no medication could make me feel comfortable enough to sleep. My alcohol consumption had increased to the point where it had become a health risk. Eventually, this led to something simple. And now, I no longer want to drink alcohol anymore. At some point, I started taking camera with me on my morning walks. That small decision began a completely new story, one that led me to rediscover a different kind of creative photography. I can tell you more about that later too. Another important thing I noticed, without fully realizing it at first, was that I had started to going to work again in the mornings. It happened quietly, almost unnoticed. I had moved to the sailboat I was restoring into a small warm workshop I own, and almost every morning I found myself heading there as I were going to the work. Sometimes I could barely finish my breakfast. I was so eager to get there. Pulling my paint-stained, dirty overalls on, not caring at all how I looked, felt like freedom in itself. And the feeling of opening that workshop door in the morning, when the smell of fiberglass and teak flowed towards me, it was deeply satisfying. It became something like a quiet addiction. I wanted to feel that moment again, morning after morning. Without realizing it, it was rediscovering my creativity, as I was finding a rhythm to my days again. Boat restoration began to produce simple to-do lists. Photography sparked a desire of experiment. I switched cameras, I changed lenses, I became fascinated with older equipment. I even started thinking about what I might eventually do with all the images. A French nature photographer, friend of mine, Brice, came to visit, and we went out photographing together. From all this creative activity, a stronger inner drive began to grow again. Mornings changed. I wanted to wake up. I wanted to go do things. Sometimes I would notice myself waiting for the morning to come so I could continue. Looking back now, I understand something important. I wasn't doing these things to reach an outcome. I wasn't working toward a result. I was doing them because the doing itself felt right. Shaping a small piece of teak for the boat, carefully fitting it into place, knowing that today that one thing was enough. There was no rush. I didn't matter if I didn't finish anything else that day. I worked on that piece until it felt perfect to me. Then I took my thermos, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat there quietly looking at it. For the first time, I felt it clearly. This was the then I will life. I'd been waiting for. All the time I had been given had finally found a shape. I no longer needed to do things for an outcome, but for the simple act of doing them. That is very different from the life you are still living. If you can, after reading this letter, pour yourself a cup of coffee and pause for a moment. Not to plan, not to decide, just to notice what might already be quietly forming beneath all that urgency. Sincerely, from the shores of Lake Saimaa, UkkiKai.